give a talk today for about 45 minutes on a few aspects of our practice. And just by way of introduction, as Andrew said, we have two offices, one in New York and one in Tucson. And we do a lot of hands-on work. We build a lot of things in our office. We have one office in New York City that's really more of a design space. And we have another office in Tucson, Arizona, which is in the deserts in the southwest of the US. And in Tucson, we have more of a kind of shop space. And it's really the relationship between these two offices, one very urban, one in the desert, that creates a lot of exciting opportunities for us. I often I teach a lot at the our practice has a deep background in academic work. And one thing I ask my students to do quite often is to be open about their sources of inspiration. And I wanted to show you basically this book that really inspired us really at the beginning of our practice. And it's this book called Aberrations by Yorgos Baltrushaitis. And it's really a book about how artists over the centuries were inspired by natural forms like rocks and wood carvings. And it was essentially a book that really looked at what they called aberrations, or aberrations is another word for, let's say, exceptions or things that break rules or that deviate from normality. And this book was very inspiring for us because it talked about looking at nature in a way that was very active and one that was very much in conversation with our own abilities and our own imagination. So a lot of the artwork or architecture that was produced in this book was not nature as a kind of found or a let's say a kind of a dead state or the image of nature, but rather postulating a new form of nature where you wouldn't erase what you were given, but you would interface with it, and you would imagine possibilities for occupation that were at once natural, but at the same time something new. And so that idea of nature really led us to, at a very early part of our practice, to imagine our own process for designing that would use rules and ways to package those rules in new kinds of software and new sorts of, let's say, techniques. And this was our first book called Tooling, part of the pamphlet architecture series. And it really looked at a lot of our early projects from the point of view of creating frameworks or processes for design, and then imagining how to share those in a very kind of simple and straightforward and transmissible way. The lecture you're going to see, so that's sort of our history, kind of where we're coming from, and what I'm going to show you right now is really where we're at as a practice. We're managing kind of a few different, let's say, a few different kinds of projects and a few different themes. And so This is kind of pin-ups of our most recent book called Trace Elements. And the book is organized into these different themes, and I'm gonna walk you through through some of those themes. Now, as we go through them, I just want to be clear that what you're going to see tonight is not all it's not all architecture. It's a mix of experiments in construction, whether that's furniture, which is really where our practice started, to where we are today. So what I'm trying to do is I'm going to show you a range of work that goes from furniture to baskets to buildings to landscapes, and it's all tied together by a few different themes. The first theme is that history is generative, and what we mean by that is that history is an active material that we like to work with in every project. This is a painting or a drawing, excuse me, by the French architect Henry Labrousse from the turn of the 18th century. And this is essentially was an exercise in the Beaux-Arts school where architects would take a ruin and imagine the future of that ruin. And we think there's something very inspiring about this drawing and how it uses history as something to reinterpret or reimagine possibilities. And that's how we approached a number of projects. This is an early project in our practice called the Grotto. The Grotto is a landscape type. It's usually often referred to as a cave, but it's an artificial one. It's a landscape device, usually tied into Renaissance or late Renaissance or English, the English landscape tradition. And the Grotto was meant to be a space of kind of let's say of narrative and eroticism. It was kind of offered in contrast to, let's say, the temples and the other more classically inspired moments in the landscape tradition. And our approach to the Grotto was to take its history as this space of something dark, heavy, shaded, and often wet. Take that history, but intersect it with a new way of imagining how to build it. And for us, that was through a set of modular boulders. And so using a series of techniques, we were basically able to imagine how to build a grotto, but using a series of modular boulders. So instead of, let's say, random rocks, this one we would imagine building out of a set of 4 different kinds of boulders that would all piece together in a unique way. And that idea of modularity, of something that was not quite fixed, really inspired a range of projects. This is also a quick project that imagines how to use a moment in history as a generative design. And the idea here is to build a chair from the year 1774. And 1774 was the year that Louis XV died. And this is the kind of chair of Louis XV. And it was also the year that the element manganese was discovered. So this is a little chunk of manganese. And manganese is actually a really important material discovery in the 18th century. And so we wanted to build a chair that basically was a moment in time. It was a sort of critique of the dawn of, or I should say, sorry, a critique of the sunset of the French monarchy, but at the moment that new material discoveries and industry was being made. And so, so this chair was all about building this moment in history. And it was made out of solid aluminum cast parts that were all fit together. This notion of history as something generative also is a technique that we've used in buildings. So this is a building in Miami for Tom Ford and a few other brands. It's in the design district, which is essentially a retail district. And we wanted to tap into the history of Art Deco. Art Deco is a type of historic architecture, very popular in Florida, in Miami, and it had its moment or its heyday back in the 30s, and really is something that Miami is known for. And we looked at a lot of Art Deco buildings, and our discovery was that, or our intuition is that Art Deco has certain motifs that involve these kind of lines or these ripples or these what are called kind of fan-like shapes. And what we wanted to do was essentially use these motifs, but in a contemporary way. Now, upon designing our own Art Deco motifs, we through a bunch of let's say testing, we realized that actually Art Deco, what it does very well in Florida is it renders the sunlight, or it plays in a very active way with shadow. And I think that was the discovery we made. Is like, well, the idea behind the history that we're pursuing here is that it can give us some material discoveries that we didn't realize in the beginning. So this is us getting involved in the fabrication of the building. This is the fabrication of the facade, which is made out of a lightweight but very strong concrete called GFRC. It's a glass fiber reinforced concrete. And what that means is that you can get these very sculptural and very detailed castings of the concrete in a way that you can't with other ways of using concrete. And I think this idea of rendering sunlight really became the most important concept behind the building, along with really discoveries in fabrication and how this GFRC, using this lightweight concrete, we could really build this building almost like you would a set of puzzles. Also in Miami, there's a project that one of our recent projects, which was a store for Valextra. This is a really exciting project for us because we got to really explore notions of materiality in a deep way. Valextra is if you don't know them, it's a really fantastic brand that makes a lot of leather goods. They're known for their handbags, and they're really about craftsmanship. They have a way of designing with craft that really hides a lot of the details, or makes a real sort of subtle and understated craft. So, you know, the stitching is extremely understated. There's no branding, there's no logo on their bags. There's the way they seal the leather is just with a line on the end. It's all very, it's very sophisticated, and it really reflects their Milanese tradition. So they're a brand from Milan in Italy. And what we did is we wanted to research Milan as well as their ideas of craftsmanship. And one thing we found in Milan, which really influenced our ideas for the project, are these certain public thresholds in Milan that use a lot of stone and marble. So in a lot of the, let's say, apartment buildings, office buildings, the thresholds to the street, so the stairways, the entryways, the lobbies, use a lot of stone that are found in Italy, and create these very, let's say, rich transitional environments in the buildings. And this is a result of Italy's incredible landscape. In the north of Italy, you have the foot of the Alps, and you have a lot of incredible quarries, both Carrara, all kinds of stone. And really with the client, who was super interested and engaged in this search for a stone, they actually recommended this stone called Arzo Macchia, as well as this one, which is a common stone called Ceppo di Gri. And so we went on this real sort of research journey with the team at Valextra to really find a material language. And eventually, once we had this material that we were going to work with, then came the design process, where we built a lot of prototypes, did a lot of testing, also discovered some really interesting wood grains, stained laminates like this one, which is designed by, it's a laminate by a company called Alpi, which was, the laminates are designed by Ettore Sozzas, who you may know as a very important figure in Italian design. And so what we were trying to do with this prototyping or experimentation process is really, again, work with ideas of very, very sophisticated fabrication or craftsmanship process in stone and in steel, but also use the Milanese or the material language from Milan to create the store. So we developed these elements that would display the materials, pedestals, shelves, walls, facades, and these elements would come together in a way that would display all the goods. And here are some photos of the final store. So it has this Ceppo di Gri facade, which is this common stone material in Milan, and it has the Arzo Macchia marble for all the pedestals. So here you can see, actually, this was an early rendering in the project, and here you see the final result with the wall behind, which is the Ettore Sozzas wood laminate wall. There's also one really fun device, which is this drawer. It's an extremely long drawer that has a spiral, a metal spiral on it. And so that single metal coil, it's like one long metal spiral, which goes through the stone, is used for organizing all of their small leather goods. Great, so that's some final images of the store. That's the Valextra project, and that's probably a good way to end that chapter of history is generative. The the other chapter, and this is I'm going to show work that's not buildings, it's not architecture, but it is it's about something that really fascinates us as a practice, and that's baskets in architecture. This is an exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Arts in Tucson of our work, or of our baskets from a few years ago. And baskets are it's something we've been involved in for, I want to say, 12 years now. Essentially what we do every year is we make a few baskets, and we do it in collaboration with a basket weaver named Terrell Dew Johnson. He's a Native American basket weaver from the Tohono O'odham tribe in Arizona. And what we do is we work with him to develop weaving techniques that use the traditional weaving techniques from his tribe, but we also introduce new ways of structuring those baskets, or ways of thinking about those techniques, like coiling in a way that might be spatial, or offer new insights into the structure of coiling. And so what you see here are a range of baskets that we made with Terrell. And we've also gone into more architectural scale versions of these baskets. Often the baskets deal with a traditional or a native stitch. So what you see here on the left is a grass coil that is unique to the Native American tribe that Terrell is from. And it's the type of grass, which is from the desert there, the coil stitching. And also on the right is horsehair, which is another common material used in their baskets. And so what we do is we develop these ways of making baskets and of using that coiling technique, but trying to search for new methods of expression with that, and always using the language of the desert in that. So the materials that you find out there in the Sonoran Desert of Arizona are things like grass, copper, horsehair. And so we've developed basically over the years, like kind of a range of experiments. And there are always these experiments. And it's been actually quite a fun part of our practice that sometimes directly relates to architectural projects, and then sometimes not. Sometimes it's really just about collaborating with Terrell. It's about having a kind of sensibility with materials. We're happy to say that some of the pieces, there were these 4 baskets that are part of the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art, and they were collected because the museum enjoyed the collaboration, but also found the work, as they told us, they wanted them as part of the collection because they thought that the baskets showed how traditional techniques can be imagined in a contemporary language. So these are just some images of us making baskets in our studio with Terrell and his team. And you can just see the process here of how we put stuff together. It's very much about just material discovery. And a kind of let's say a geometric interest we have. But mostly it's a way for us to kind of remain engaged in a material culture and to produce work that is that's meaningful and resonant to the local community there. So I always like to show these baskets because they really do, I think they illustrate a part of our practice that is, that's very important to us. It's quite personal to us. And it's part of our output. It might not be buildings, but it shows our commitment to making things and to making things within a kind of, let's say, a cultural context. The other important theme in our work is what we call broken drawings. The broken drawings is a term that refers to a fractal. So a fractal is a way of drawing scale or a way of drawing infinitely, and it was developed by the mathematician Mandelbrot. And he coined the term fractal because the way that you mathematically build a continuous fractal is by breaking it down into parts. And that idea of breaking down a drawing in order to develop continuity is something that I think carries through really almost in all of our projects. So this here is a drawing and a piece of furniture. This is a chair. It's a line of chairs that we've made called railing. And basically the railing is a study of developing these continuous loops through a fractal network. So it's, here you can see essentially you have this shape, and the shape has a bunch of circles on it. And then you can draw by connecting those circles, and eventually you end up with a loop, and that loop is structural, stable, and we make modifications to allow for comfort. It's interesting too because we build it out of steel and then we coat it in silicon foam, and the advantage of using these loops. These fractal loops is that you can have pre-bent pieces of metal, which is important. If any of you have ever bent a pipe or bent a piece of metal, you know that in bending it distorts it, or it distorts the section. And we didn't want that distortion. We wanted a kind of clean loop. And so this was a way for us to build where we could piece together all these arcs and develop a wide range of furniture from it. We also have a long-standing collaboration with an artist named Matthew Ritchie, where some of our work is about building these structural loops that come together to form these sculptures that are made up of his drawings, and his drawings are narratives that talk about, well, they talk about a lot of issues, but they mainly have to do with a kind of cosmological narratives that he develops. And so our role in the collaboration is very similar to the collaboration with the basket weaver, but in this case, what we do is we develop these kind of structural armatures, like out of steel, out of metal, and then we work with the artists to apply their drawings onto these structural loops. And so here what you're seeing is paper models, some 3D printed models, and then the actual piece being made out of aluminum. And so the way it's built is very much how you build the paper models. Essentially, you take these very large pieces of aluminum and then you bend them in these rollers, and then you remove the drawing from the sheet. And so that's a series of works with Matthew. Another piece that we did probably in, I want to say it was 2009 or 2010, is a piece called The Morning Line, which also deals very directly with the fractal. So this is the Morning Line in Seville. The Morning Line is a pavilion. It's a pavilion. It's a sound pavilion and a video pavilion. It's essentially a kind of instrument that musicians and other artists would use to play sound and music compositions. And what we did is we developed a kind of structure for this space. And the structure would be developed out of a single block. So we were really interested in this fractal idea of a modularity that comes out of one shape. So one shape that could create this like complex network. And the way that it grows is essentially through a very kind of periodic or regular repeating framework. But it also has, scalar versions of itself to create structure and to create programmatic opportunities. So here you see the kind of solid version of it, and then you see the drawing version of it. And what we could do, because it was made out of all of these blocks, is we could move it around the world and we could reconfigure it depending on where we went. So the pavilion was imagined as a pavilion that would situate itself in these different contexts, and depending on the site, it would change its configuration. So this is in İmanu Square in Turkey, in Istanbul. And here you can see, you can see the detail here of four different scales. You have, the smallest scale, you have the medium scale, there's a large scale block, and then finally the super scale block was the largest one. But they all connect, and all of the lines connect to every other line, so that essentially the drawing acts structurally. So the drawing both defines the piece, it defines the space, but it also defines the way that gravity or forces move through the pavilion. And the drawings would also change too. They would change from one end to the other. So this is a plan drawing of that piece. And then here you can see a sort of X-ray of the piece that has the speakers and the videos in order to define the different sound environments for the piece. So that's the Morning Line. We also use this fractal technique to develop this is a competition that we won. We produced construction drawings for this building, but it unfortunately never made it through past construction documents because of it was a government project in the West African nation of Gabon. And so one thing we were interested in using was wood and this sort of screening language, which was popular there. But I wanted to show this project because it uses that same idea of developing a kind of structural block. And the block in this case is if you will, a stripe, a kind of a stripe of wood and aluminum. We basically developed this aluminum extrusion that could be copied and used to create a network of structure that had columns, shadings, and openings for light. And essentially, this the way this was built, essentially there were, let's say, 7 of these columns. And each column was made out of a kind of a foot, let's say, and you essentially grow the structure using this stripe or using this module to create surfaces, and each of those surfaces would then rest on their neighbors. So, and then out of those surfaces and the column, you get these kind of trees, and each tree would then lean onto the neighboring tree until eventually it came back to itself. And that idea of a structure that constantly leans on itself for support is what's called a reciprocal structure. And this reciprocal structure is something we were really interested in exploring, and interested in exploring using a single element that would do everything. It would solve structure, lighting. It would have all the services, and it would allow us to create this flexible environment. Okay, realizing I'm running short on time, so I'm going to quickly go through this project, this is maybe a kind of a new direction for some of our more artistic endeavors. This is a landscape installation in Columbus, Indiana, and it was a competition that we won, and it imagines how to use discarded materials like stone. In Indiana, limestone is one of the most important industries in that state. A lot of the limestone that we see in really a lot of buildings across the United States use Indiana limestone. In fact, the Empire States Building here in New York City is made of limestone. And what's amazing about limestone is that it produces a lot of waste. So, you can see people making all these kind of architectural elements for buildings, columns, capitals, cornices, all that stuff. And then there's buckets and buckets and truckloads of waste that come out of these limestone factories. And so our idea was to use this waste. Because what we realize is that the waste is somehow predictable. It comes in certain sizes, and we asked these limestone mills, these factories, if we could use their material, and they offered it to us for free. And so we had this free material that we could use that was very valuable. It's this beautiful stone. And we knew that it was predictable in the sizes that it came in. And so we began to develop techniques to organize it. So to organize these thousands of pieces of stone. And we organize it into different activities like games, theater, park, classes, picnics. And then we converted all of those locations for the stones into GIS locations. So what was really fun about this project is watching the builders build it. We essentially told them that we wanted them only to use phones. So they weren't going to use any traditional equipment in construction. So no tape measures, no strings, no levels, none of the traditional, no lasers, none of the traditional equipment, only phones and stones. And we asked, and whenever they got to a location on that map, one of those pins, that pin would have instructions. So it would say like, okay, build something, say a meter tall, or build 7 stacks, or in this one, put it at an angle and have it face in this direction. And so we essentially, all of these moments, the builders built it themselves from the instructions on their phones. And so what we got was this landscape of furniture, really, built out of stone that was essentially discarded, but that we could utilize or imagine a new use for. And so this project, I think, was really special to us because it shows a way of being, let's say, very precise with the material. It shows a way of being resourceful. It's a very important material culturally for this area that we did this project, and it really shows a way that we can imagine how to build with what we have, and that's my last slide.